From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A good night for Democrats on Election Day 2023 as they retake the Virginia House, hold the Kentucky governor's mansion, and put abortion into the Ohio Constitution. And the 2024 Republican presidential candidates set to debate tonight in Miami are already jockeying over the party's disappointment. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today again by my colleagues, editorial board members Kate Batchelder-Odell and Mene Ukwe-Barua. Kate, let's start in Virginia. Governor Glenn Youngkin has high approval ratings, has put a lot of political capital on the line, trying to retake the state house, paving the way for the passage of a Glenn Youngkin agenda. And it looks like he is going to have instead a frustrating next 2 years. Can you give us a sense of what the results in these state house races are looking like?
So Glenn Youngkin did put a lot on the line to try to flip the state Senate. And I think he deserves credit for that, for making a real run at it. And incumbent governors tend to lose seats in midterms. That's just how political gravity works. And there were some reasons here that we were discussing yesterday why flipping the state Senate was going to be really tough for Governor Youngkin. Of 7 swing districts for the state Senate, congressional Democrats carried all 7 of them in 2022. And Youngkin carried 4 of them in 2021, so they were competitive. But it shows, for instance, this was always an uphill battle. What you have here is really a narrowly divided legislature. So Republicans are actually going to pick up 1 seat, it looks like, in the state Senate, which they needed 2 for full control for a 2020 tie. And that 1 Senate seat looks like it's going to come from southeastern Virginia in a close race in Williamsburg, where Sheriff Danny Diggs looks like he's going to beat Monty Mason, the Democratic incumbent. So they did pick up that 1 seat, but what was more of a surprise is losing the House. But that is, again, a very narrow Democratic majority at 51-49 shaping up at this point. So these races were decided in a handful of districts that Biden carried, and they were quite close. But I do think a couple lessons or realities are in order. One of them is just the enduring abortion debate that is not benefiting Republicans. So Glenn Youngkin favors a 15-week limit on abortion with several exceptions. National money poured in, and Democrats made that a singular issue in some swing districts. For instance, in Loudoun County, in a district that Glenn Youngkin won by really less than 1 point, the Democrat there made abortion really her premier issue and defeated the GOP candidate, Juan Pablo Seguera. And you also had in suburban Richmond, we were talking yesterday about Siobhan Dunavant, a Republican moderate OBGYN who talked about how her support for abortion compromise was informed by her own experience delivering premature infants. She lost in a suburban district outside of Richmond, really the heart of the kind of voters that Republicans have been struggling to win since Donald Trump. You have some other things that at the margins surely didn't help. I was talking about Loudoun County near Washington, D.C. No doubt the House chaos contributed somewhat negatively there. But really, the reality is on abortion and Trump extremism is what Democrats are running on everywhere. And it is, for the moment, working.
One thing I think is important to keep in mind, though, as you're describing, Kate, is that Virginia has just become a very tough state for Republicans. I saw one reporter on Twitter, or I guess it's called X now, saying that Republicans are on track to win every seat that went for Biden by less than 8 points. And so I think that is part of the dynamic here. And it's hard because I think Virginia Republicans can get their hopes up quite easily because it wasn't so long ago that it was more of a red state, or at least a competitive state. And now we're going into a period where Glenn Youngkin is not going to have control of either chamber of the legislature, and he is more like a Republican governor in a blue state. That is kind of the reality in Virginia, and we have some models for that. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts has been one, Larry Hogan in Maryland. But Kate, I think that that's important context to remember is whether it is the growth of these suburbs in Northern Virginia in particular, these additions of government workers. Remember, we just went through a period where Republicans were maybe going to shut down the federal government, and then they didn't have a Speaker of a House for 3 weeks. I can't imagine that a lot of those government workers in Northern Virginia are attracted by a Republican Party that is doing those kinds of things. And the other factor is also just the Trump effect. I mean, I went back and looked this morning, and President Trump lost the state of Virginia in 2016 by 5 points, and then in 2020 by 10 points, double digits. And so part of what you have to keep in mind when you're looking at these results, Kate, I think is Glenn Youngkin performing above replacement? And even if we have this split result in the state legislature, it still looks to me like he is doing almost as good of a job as any Republican can be expected, given the political dynamics on the ground there.
Right. I mean, I think that's right. I think you're going to see here in many cases Youngkin overperforming Trump by significant margin. And even though Youngkin, his political style could not be more distinct from Donald Trump's, and Youngkin is popular in the state among independents and Republicans, but I think it has been difficult for Republicans to kind of shake off the lingering distaste that is in these suburban communities outside of Richmond, in Hampton Roads, and Northern Virginia of Donald Trump. And again, that's the theme that Democrats are really hitting over and over again, which is that their opponents are MAGA extremists. And you hear the president do this at a national level to some extent. And Democrats may conclude from this evening that in their strong performance that, well, it works and that we can run Joe Biden again and win. We can talk a little later why I think that is a risky profile. But on the narrow question of Virginia, yes, divided government will cramp what Governor Youngkin can get done. But I will be watching closely if the governor could move any of his tax planks, for instance, and convince any Democrats to go along with any of that, given some of it is politically popular, and there may be opportunities to get some more discrete items done even in divided government. So I think he still retains some political capital, hopefully to move some planks of that agenda.
Monet, what were your takeaways from the results in these two gubernatorial races in Kentucky and Mississippi that you previewed on yesterday's episode?
Well, we both had pretty expected outcomes in Mississippi and Kentucky. The Republican incumbent held on in Mississippi by about 5 points, and the Democratic incumbent held on in Kentucky by the same margin. To start with Mississippi, what you saw was Democrats maybe exaggerating the amount of opportunity they got from a scandal in the state house there. To reiterate, Tate Reeves, the governor, was implicated in this scandal wherein millions of dollars of state welfare funds ended up going to improper uses, and Democrats suggested that these are the fruits of Republican one-party governance in the state. And Brandon Presley, the challenger, really wanted to suggest that it's time for a changing of the guard. Mississippians deserve better governance. So it was a campaign really focused on the nuts and bolts, a little bit less than some of these other national issues that characterized other races around the country. And Brandon Presley himself is pro-life, and so you didn't have the abortion question in this race in the same way that you did in some of the others, and so that ended up being a little bit of a wash. But I think that Tate Reeves held on merely because he has been a fairly successful and fairly popular governor of the state. He's managed to cut taxes, the economy is growing, and people didn't think that there was an urgent need for a change in that particular race. I do think that Donald Trump's presence in that race is an interesting feature. Tate Reeves did solicit Trump's endorsement, and Trump sent a video message about a week before Election Day. So the governor held off on inviting Trump to come directly into the state and decided to solicit that endorsement fairly late in the game. So I think this is one of the ways that a lot of Republican politicians are trying to approach Donald Trump. They want to have him as someone who can help turn voters out, especially late in the game, but they don't want their brand to be associated directly with him. And Tate Reeves kind of managed to accomplish that balance. The other race was in Kentucky, where Andy Beshear held on. Again, that's the Democrat. He won by about 5 points over the challenger Daniel Cameron. And that was a race that Republicans really were optimistic about. It tightened a lot as it went down to the wire. The latest polls even showed Cameron with a slight lead after trailing by about 10 points a month or so ago. But I do think that this is one where the abortion question probably did play a somewhat decisive role. You could see that Daniel Cameron was forced to shift his positions a little bit as the race went on in response to some of the negative ads that the Beshear campaign was running about his stance on abortion. Kentucky has a near complete ban, and Daniel Cameron has suggested initially that he would uphold that completely. But I think probably some of their internal polling showed how much damage that was doing with a lot of these moderate suburban voters in places like Louisville, Lexington, et cetera. And so Cameron eventually moderated, suggesting that he would be open to exceptions for rape and incest. And then he basically was flip-flopped just a little bit and said that he would accept those exceptions if they were mandated by court order, but wouldn't actually seek them on his own through legislation. And so it's very easy for me to imagine that the Kentucky electorate was put off by his inability to take a consistent line on that issue, and that in the end, it was enough to make moderate voters in that state who already approved of Governor Beshear by a high margin to think it wasn't worth taking a chance on a Cameron governorship.